Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's now 1 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. But before we do, I would like to cover just a few housekeeping items. This is ICI's webinar on market driver modeling. It will run for approximately 30 minutes and will be immediately followed by a question and answer session. We're not going to be taking questions during the presentation, but we will be aggregating them and answering them all at the end. If you would like to ask a question at any time, you can do so using the GoToWebinar dashboard on the right-hand side of your screen. That's all of our housekeeping items, so without any more ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mike Malone.
Hi folks, thanks for joining us today. The topic is market driver modeling, and market driver modeling is one of the most powerful market research techniques that is available for understanding what ultimately determines the appeal of your brand and the general willingness of customers to buy your product. This is a very established methodology. It's been around for around 30 years, and it has been used throughout the world, and it has been used probably in excess of a couple thousand times just in the North American market. It was designed to help you understand specifically what are the factors that ultimately determine brand affinity at the company and product service level. Brand affinity here is an amalgamation of all the things that represent the likelihood of a consumer to buy from you. Now, once you identify those factors, it provides an ideal platform for understanding the competitive landscape, not just at the aggregate level of market share or overall brand affinity, but at the nuts and bolts of how well do each brands, and whenever I say brand, that's a proxy for a brand, a product, a suite of products, basically anything that can be sold out there, as well as services. It allows you to understand exactly why each competitor has the position that it currently does in the market. With that perspective, you're able to look at, if you apply this at your product level, it's an ideal tool for determining, do you have a optimized product service portfolio? Market drivers represent the factors that ultimately, they're the criteria people use when they are buying your products and services, and you're able to determine which of those factors are going to determine market share. As you look at your products and compare their relative performance across those market drivers, you're able to find out, do we basically have a hole in our repertoire or our portfolio? And having that 30,000-foot view of the strength and the breadth of your portfolio relative to the ideal is very valuable. And because you have that insight, you could develop very actionable strategies, and actionable strategies that you can be assured are going to respond to the criteria people use when they're buying products and services out there. Also help you to be very effective in developing competitive strategy, because you know the strength and weakness of every competitor as well as yours. Now, what is a market driver model? It's pretty straightforward, folks. It's an amalgamation of all the selection criteria people use to choose the products and services that are offered in whatever competitive market that you're looking at. And it examines the relationship between these individual selection criteria and brand affinity. Now, brand affinity, again, this is a proxy variable representing brand strength in terms of brand equity, the value of your brand, but also the capacity of your brand to pull or draw customers to your products and services. Market drivers are not attitudinal in structure. They're actually based on behavior. The selection criteria are not presented in a hypothetical context. It's specifically the last time you purchased this product, what was the respective weight assigned to these selection criteria. So it's behaviorally based on experience and knowledge, and so it has a substantive foundation that gives you far better predictive accuracy than if it's based on attitudes that are just looking at, well, how do you feel about this company? Now, market drivers can be, if you're not careful, a little bit like being on the receiving end of a fire hose. It's imperative that you approach it with a organizational scheme that allows you to understand the dynamics of the individual market drivers and their interaction. And by virtue of that, we found that it's most helpful when you're looking at market drivers to identify market drivers in 4 primary competitive arenas. The first one, product and service feature function, basically what does the product or service actually deliver to the customer. The second arena is vendor capacity and performance. What's it like to do business with your organization? Everything from the documentation you provide along with your services to service and support to if you're relying on channels, the breadth of your channels and market coverage, but the things that are controlled by the actual vendor. Then there's a third arena that typically is distinct in all of these models that refers to a combination of price, value, ROI. The 3 are so highly correlated that they always walk together. And then the last category is customer experience, which is what is the actual experience of a consumer relative to their expectations. And those 4 arenas provide a comprehensive view of the market, and with market drivers you can determine how are we doing in that opportunity space. Now, market driver brand affinity, I've used that a couple times. Brand affinity is actually a composite metric. And when we talk about a composite metric, it means it's basically, in this instance, it is a weighted average of 4 individual metrics. This is very important because when you're trying to predict brand strength, you don't want to put all your eggs in one metric basket. You want to have a very good, robust measure of overall brand strength. And to do that, we look at it from 4 different perspectives. One component going into our definition of brand affinity, which we use ultimately to identify the market drivers, is share of wallet. And that is when you look at how much a consumer or a company purchases in any product category in a given year. Let's assume they purchase $100. How much of each individual consumer's spend goes to each competitor? Now that's different than market share. Share of wallet just says among the folks who buy from you, on average, how much of their business do you get? A second metric that we use for brand affinity is overall satisfaction. Now, satisfaction here is very specific to you had expectations. To what degree were those expectations met? This is very important because it's not some given the ideal, which is a very difficult metric to rely on. This is based on you had expectations, were they met at the time of purchase? And then we combine those 2 metrics with 2 other metrics that are basically looking at how strongly a consumer feels about a brand, and that's reflected in what's the likelihood they would recommend the brand in the future and what's the likelihood they would repurchase in the future. Now, they're highly correlated here, folks, but many times you'll see a situation where for whatever reason somebody's likely to repurchase a brand or a product, but they would not recommend it. Those are the kind of nuances that help us build a very strong brand affinity outcome measure, which ultimately is the foundation on which the market driver modeling is built. Notice also, by virtue of using 4 of these metrics, we're able to find out to what degree do they all align. And if you have alignment across all metrics, you have stronger brand affinity than if you just did extremely well on 2 metrics and so on 2 other metrics. So this is a very good metric. It's been vetted now in several thousand studies, and it provides a good proxy for how are people likely to behave in the future. What's the likelihood they'll buy from you in the future? Now, the market driver modeling process, and this is a busy slide, and I apologize for it, but it shows you the flow. Basically, you identify the selection, the individual selection criteria that people use when they are purchasing a product. Now, you get these by conducting some kind of qualitative exercise, or you do a mini quant survey. You know, you only need to talk to 10 to 20 people, and you get a very comprehensive list. In this instance, we found that there were 28 individual distinct selection criteria, and you want as much as possible, folks, to make them distinct. One time we had a client, we got into this exercise, we came up with 250. Oh man, were they redundant. But that client was 1 in a million. The majority of clients are more reasonable, but you will ascertain either through a little qual study, a little quant study, the selection criteria. The selection criteria are always defined in terms of the last time you purchased this product or service. It's not what should you. You don't want to get an ideal. You want to say, what did you actually use and consider when buying this product? Now, after you have identified that set of collection criteria, you then identify folks who have purchased products in your target space within the last year. And you're trying to find out what companies did they buy from and what companies did they consider and not buy. This is very important because getting a perspective of products or companies that were considered but not selected really provides the most substantive input into this modeling. But you have folks who have purchased the target product or service in the last year, rate everyone that they have had actual experience with. This is only folks you've had experience. We don't care what you think about people you haven't purchased or considered. This is only those companies or products you have experience with, and then rate them relative to your perception of the market, and it's worst in the market to best in the market. Now, you go through and you're going to, if you, for example, bought from one company but considered 4, you're going to rate a total of 4 companies using these scales. And you're going to rate each company using all 28. Now, this is one of the drawbacks of Market Driver. This part can get a little tedious, but if you're careful about your questionnaire design, you can get people through this exercise because this is really where the actual value of Market Driver modeling is born. Now, after you get all of these ratings, in this instance 28 selection criteria, we apply factor analysis because, you know, I made the joke about the company that had 250. Well, even 28. Do people really carry around 28 separate distinct thoughts regarding a product service? No, they don't. Typically, you'll find that if you were to condense these down to distinct, what we call decision references in the brain, that there will be maybe 6 to 12. And you use factor analysis to basically render down this long list of selection criteria into actual factors or groups of selection criteria that are very highly correlated and actually represent dimensions of the same criteria theme. And that's very important, folks, because if you're a statistical geek, if you don't apply this factor analysis, you run into a monster called multicollinearity, which really screws up your modeling. But if you apply factor analysis, you get these nice statistically distinct clusters of selection criteria, which really help your modeling process. But they also provide valuable insight into the nature of the mind of the consumer, because the structure of those market drivers, which is unique to every study, represents the constellation of influences that ultimately determine market share. Now, in this instance, those 28 selection criteria were rendered down to create 10 distinct market drivers. Now, these color codes here actually refer, we don't have that legend on this table, they refer to which family, or which of the arenas we just talked about they come from. But in this instance, we came up with 10 distinct market drivers. So 28 selection criteria rendered down with factor analysis into 10 distinct market drivers, and then we use structural equation modeling, and we look at, it's somewhat like regression. We're looking at what is the capacity. If I know a company's rating on a market driver, what is the likelihood that I could use that single rating to predict the likelihood that a consumer will buy from that company in the future? Now, that predictive capacity is what you get with structural equation modeling. And structural equation modeling basically comes back and it helps us identify the relative influence of each of these 10 statistically distinct market drivers. This is the foundation. Now, these numbers over to the right we're going to talk about a little. That's the actual impact on market share. And market share, the proxy for market share that we use is brand affinity. I talked about that a little earlier. So this basically talks about not only just market share, but your overall brand presence, the strength of your brand, because ultimately anything that improves brand affinity improves brand equity by virtue of the fact it represents an increase in market share and revenue. And as you can see here, the impact of each of these market drivers varies significantly, with product quality, and this is not uncommon, being the most impactful, but right behind it is your e-commerce capacity. And this is actual real data that's been masked, so the identity of the client's not there. But we basically see that e-commerce capacity is like the #2 driver of all the things that you could invest in. And so if you're looking at should we offer more flexible terms and conditions, which will cost you, or should we spend that money on improving our website? Well, what this says is basically you're going to get about 2.5 times the return for an investment in e-commerce capacity that you will get by improving terms and conditions. This is the kind of tangible insight market drivers provide, and that's much of its value. But this is the process. Selection criteria, factor analyze them into distinct market drivers, and then determine the influence of each market driver over brand affinity. Now, these scores that we have, this was something that came about. This whole paradigm of analysis was actually born in customer satisfaction research done at the University of Michigan in the early 90s. And this is the same methodology that, or the foundation of this is used for the American Customer Satisfaction Index. But what we found was that we could model pretty effectively the change in market share as represented by brand affinity in our model associated with improved performance. And the way this works, if you remember those scales that everybody was rated on from 0 to 10, from worst of the market, best market, if you could improve your score for product quality by 5%, let's say that your baseline score on that scale is 7. If you could get that score to improve by 5%, take it from 7 to 7.35 in this instance here, you will increase brand affinity for your brand and related share that goes with this by 0.3%. It's that specific. Now, folks, one of the things I do need to emphasize, can we be that accurate to pin this down? The answer is no. There are a lot of variables outside the market driver that ultimately also will influence market share. But market drivers are predicated on a thought that the most important thing is understanding the relative strength of these each one of these market drivers. And though whether or not you're going to pick up 0.3% or it's going to be 0.4%, you know, actually the variance on there is plus or minus about 15 to 20% on there. So you have a little wiggle room there. But in terms of the relative position, which tells you what return will I get for an investment in improving, your example, e-commerce versus terms and conditions, relatively speaking, this is spot on. And when you're making a tough decision, you never have enough money to do all the things you'd like to do to improve a product or service, and you have to marshal them to get the best return. This is where market drivers provides invaluable guidance. And the nice part about market drivers is that that guidance is comprehensive across all the factors that influence market share. Now, when you have that kind of detailed breakdown of the factors that control brand affinity and ultimately market share, then you have a tool to get unparalleled insight into the market. Now, what we have here, for example, is a cutout from the results comparing 4 companies plus a aggregated overall rest of market in terms of their performance on e-commerce capacity. Notice we have the industry average there, and we have the relative influence of each of the individual selection criteria within that market driver factor. So that shows you right now security and the recommendation engine are figured prominently in the overall e-commerce capacity rating. But what we look at are what are the average scores in the market right now. This is on 0 to 10. Well, what you see right now, relatively speaking, you know, honestly, folks, and when you're looking at scores, if you have something below 8, there's nothing to write home about. You see, with the exception of website responsiveness, security protocol, or excuse me, website responsiveness, we've got some weakness. This just gives you insight into this market driver. And then to the right, what we've done is we've taken the actual ratings for each company, we divided by the industry average to come up with an index score. It just makes it a little easier. For example, company A has a 9% advantage over the industry average in terms of website ease of use. If you go over to company C, they have a 5% disadvantage. This just helps you with the math. But if you roll up a weighted, multiply the index score times the impact, and you roll it up, you come up with the summative index score for that e-commerce capacity. And notice the range that we have there. We basically have company B who's doing extremely well, and then we have company A is a little better than average, and then the balance of the market falls short. Guess where you're going to hunt. But see the detail here, the insight, how specific it is, and everything is tied back to impact on brand affinity and market share. So this is where we get this ROI link, which ultimately determines not only the return you get for the investment, but the potential benefit you gain by using this technology. Now, a real-world example, a client was a large U.S. company offering industrial products in 10 different product categories. We created a customized market driver. This was a B2B space, and they were used to develop category-specific marketing strategies. We actually did market driver models for every one of the 10 product categories, as well as an aggregate model for the industrial supplier space. And from this, they developed not only a portfolio optimization strategy across each of the 10 product categories, but they developed their positioning and strategic marketing strategy based on the industrial supplier model. When we came in, here's a perfect example. We had 2 levels of important drivers here, and what we found in this model, which we have a total of 13 market drivers. We have 5 that really are doing the majority of the work here. Product quality, again, e-commerce, and this is real data here, it figures prominently. Now, you can't get around the product quality. We call that jacks are better to open, but those are table stakes to really be considered. But product quality wasn't really that differentiated when we looked at the scores out there. E-commerce capacity, operational cost benefits. This was where the client found that they had the most opportunity to move the needle and to get the best return for that. And the top 5 market drivers in this model account for 56% of the total impact. So you're able to see instantly, okay, here's the battlefield and here's what will determine success and failure. Now, with that, we then had, I just showed you, that was an industrial supplier level market driver. We also had done it for each of the product categories. Notice that the product categories, market drivers, though there are a lot of similarities, have key structural differences. E-commerce capacity in this example, which is critical to the success of an industrial supplier, is not as important at the product level. And what we found there was that there is the whole business of getting people into an industrial supplier, and then there's a completely different business of selling them once they are inside the industrial supplier. The combination of these 2 models provides an opportunity. It gives detailed feedback to the product guys, but also makes sure that you identify those elements that are common between the industrial supplier level and the product level that could be used for a corporate positioning strategy. And again, folks, you have all of this perspective, and with this you have measured impact on opportunity, which ultimately tells you value. Now, this is an extremely busy slide, but what we've done here is we've broken down the market drivers, and here they're presented in terms of those 4 arenas that I spoke of earlier. And notice Company A was our client here. We're focused on Company A rather than have all the scores indexed in terms of industry average. They said we want all the competitors indexed relative to us. So here's a different perspective. See immediately how you see strength and weakness by virtue of plus and minus sign of Company A versus Company B versus Company C. Very tangible. We also have all this presented in the context of the impact. This chart right here, I can't tell you how many times I've heard clients refer to, this is the money chart. This tells us exactly the nuts and bolts that we should be considering when we're developing our marketing strategy. And by virtue of this, this also provides a fantastic input for your customer satisfaction research. If you include these market drivers, which you don't have to ask all 28 now, you just have to ask the 10 or 13 market driver questions that you've got in there, you could be monitoring your effectiveness of all of your programs relative to this baseline. And again, that's how you measure ROI, and you systematically hone in on doing it as effectively as it can be done. Now, other things that you could do with this data, if you look at market driver impact score, that's the importance of each market driver, and you look at how well are these drivers being fulfilled right now, you can isolate quickly. Here are important market drivers that no one's doing that well. This is the average of all of them. Prime opportunity for growth. If we could improve here, we could move, because they have big impact, but they're underserved at this time. See how specific and actionable this insight is? That's one of the valuable things about market drivers. Another element is measuring market velocity. If you sum the impact scores across all of the market drivers, and you come up with the summative impact score, it provides an excellent proxy for how fast that market is turning over. Now, typically, products early in their life cycle have very large summative impact. If you add up all the impact scores, they suggest that there's going to be a lot of movement with any improvement in market driver performance. When there's a lot of movement, typically found at earlier stages of product life cycle, that means that the market's going to respond very fast to what you're doing. And if you're looking at multiple products, now, as I mentioned, this client had 10 different product categories. The effort that's required to produce, or the time you need to wait for improvements to manifest themselves for like product K and product J, will be 1/4 the time you have to wait product A. Product A, basically, you could go out there and make significant improvements, but they have relatively minor impact scores. You're not going to be able to move the needle much. We call this market velocity, and market velocity is an incredibly valuable perspective because it helps you, if you're looking for short-term results and versus long-term investment, this is a valuable insight that says, here's the market that is really up for grabs, and if we want to gain share, our best bet for translating improvement into improved share is to focus on these product categories. Another very common application that's quite valuable is that we look at portfolio evaluation. Now we're looking at in this case, 12 product categories, and what we've got is market velocity. I just explained that. We break down by relative vendor strength. Now, the vendor here, this is just our client, and what we're looking at is that our client is relatively weak in 4 product categories that have very fast velocity, which means that weakness is going to take a bite out of them very quickly. This shows you vulnerability, and it provides perspective, and always in a comprehensive context of all your products. It's this view, this 30,000-foot view, that you could drill down and get very specific, not only about what are the dynamics of the market, but how those dynamics unfold across competitors. That's where you get the power and the value of market drivers. Now, as I mentioned, you can provide cut this a million ways, folks. Here we come back and we said, let's get a rolled up view of each competitor across the 4 arenas that I mentioned earlier. Well, competitor A does really well across all 4. You get to see exactly which arena that strength comes from. It comes from vendor strength, and you see the relative position of competitors. Now, in this instance, with this, it was so obvious, competitor A decided we're going to take share from competitor D. And they went in with everything they had, and they said, look, we do much better at customer experience than they do, so we're going to beat that drum. And from that, they came up with a very actionable positioning strategy that they actually executed quite well. And this was not esoteric. This was not some black box wondering, well, okay, here's how the market looks. This is really straightforward. And folks, selection criteria, you roll them up into factors, you use structural equation modeling to determine impact on brand affinity, and if you use a comprehensive scan of the market to base this on, you really do have the perspective you need to develop a very actionable and effective marketing strategy. Now, market driver modeling, it provides a precise, comprehensive profile of the factors dictating success or failure in a market. It provides a detailed evaluation of the competitive landscape. It identifies white space where nobody's doing that well, but there's a demand and it's important to the clients. And it allows you to model the return on investment associated with alternative marketing product development investments. Very straightforward, very tangible, And of all the things that you could do when you are looking at profiling a market opportunity, I think the most important is you need to have a foundation of good buyer behavior profile to understand, you know, who, what, where, when, and how. But after that buyer behavior profile, I do not believe you're going to find any other marketing research technique that will even approach the return you could get from market drivers. That's the presentation, folks. Questions?